All right, thank you, Constantine. John, you ignorant slut. No, that's the other one. Start over. Esteemed colleagues, social psychology exists in two fields. The larger, more familiar one being in psychology, but there's also social psychology in sociology departments. The two social psychologies, the psychological and sociological, don't differ much in terms of their content, their methods and measures and things like that. Where they differ is in the starting point for how they think about what they do. In psychology, we start from the individual out, inner processes, work to interactions between pairs, sometimes we get on to larger groups and so on. And if we get all the way to culture, we tend to think of culture as a collection of people with a certain kind of self-construal or cognitive tendency or something like that, not of it as a system of interacting parts. The sociologists start at the opposite extreme. They start with the giant system, the culture and how things are working together, work down through the large organizations and institutions, get to the groups, and occasionally then to dyadic interactions. And if they get to individuals at all, it's as a product of these giant cultural forces. Now, I'm a psychologist, so I like our way better. But that doesn't mean you can't occasionally get some insights from considering the opposite point of view and respecting the sociological perspective. Culture is not just some mysterious force, a loose cannon that enters into our lives and oppresses us and makes us do bizarre things. Culture is a system that people use to guide their behavior, that they work with and participate in because it makes life better for them. Culture confers huge advantages for survival and reproduction. In a sense, culture is our species' biological strategy. Culture is how we solve the problems of survival and reproduction. Now, even today, if we have problems with survival and reproduction, we turn to the culture to do more research or change the healthcare agenda or give tax breaks to families with small children or whatever. Culture works extremely well. We all live much better as part of culture than we would if we were, say, plopped down in nature, having to eke out a living with our bare hands. Culture kicks ass. And for it to work, however, culture requires advanced psychological capabilities. Just as to use the internet, you need a computer that is capable of making use of the systems. Technology moment. There we go. You need a computer that has the hardware capabilities to interface with the system, and in the same way, culture can work, but the capabilities of the individual psychologically have to be there to do it. And that's, I think, the context we want to use to start thinking about free will. Now, the phrase the social animal has been used by thinkers from Aristotle to Aronson to describe human beings. And they're correct. We are social animals, but there are many social animals. And in being social animals, that calls attention to how we are similar to these many other species. If you want to understand distinctively what makes us human, what sets us apart, it is as cultural animals. Culture as a new and better way of being social, that's what sets us apart. There are some other species that have bits of culture, but for them it's a minor peripheral thing where it saturates everything we do. It is the essence of what we are. And so, understanding human nature, the distinctively human traits are the things that are designed, presumably by evolution, to enable us to work with this new kind of way of being social, as in culture. And again, I think free will and consciousness is most likely to be understood as that way, as adaptations for this new and better kind of social life. Consider animal behavior for a moment. Animals exist in the present, stuck in time, to use the title of a recent Psych-Bulletin article. They live in the immediate present, can't represent the past and future very much. Respond to stimuli in the immediate environment around them, and that's it. Respond on the basis of instincts, inner drives, reinforcement history. There's relatively little in the way of what we call executive function, emotional intelligence, or rational intelligent choice, or self-control, and so on. And so, given this, animals ultimately unsuitable and incapable of culture. They're not able to create and sustain this kind of cultural system in their social life. And try as we might to educate them about the benefits of culture, try to teach them some words, show them by example how a culture operates, instill some fashion sense in them, but it still doesn't take, they're not able to create and produce a system like that. And that's ultimately why we put them into zoos and or eat them rather than the other way around. equipped by nature with all these capabilities, with instincts and conditioning processes and so on. But we can also be cultural. We can also change our behavior to make this kind of system work. What is needed to make that system work, to act culturally, is to be able to break free to some degree of these natural response patterns. And that, again, I think that's the essence of the pragmatic problem of free will. The system can work as long as people respect the prescriptions and act on that basis to some degree. Waitresses, for example, are not supposed to take bites out of the food that they serve to patrons. But if you hire dogs as waitresses, there'll be some bites taken. The system to work has to require the capability to overcome those natural tendencies. And the conflict between the natural impulse versus the civilized restraint of the sophisticated cultured human being, this is a conflict that is experienced and played out over and over again every day all over the world. So, let's say something called free will evolved. I suggest it evolved for the purpose of enabling us to function in culture. It evolved because of the huge payoffs in survival and reproduction. The cultural environment confers great advantages on us in both these and other outcomes. But again, the system can function only to the degree to which people can follow its demands and prescriptions. So in a sense, free will is for following rules. I'm going to repeat that for a moment. That's not the only thing free will is for, but it's an important thing. And we think of freedom as not having any rules so you can do whatever you feel like, whatever you want. But the thing is, animals can do whatever they want and whatever they feel like. They don't need free will for that. What you need free will is to operate in this kind of cultural environment where there are rules so that you can still pursue advantage in that. So perhaps the more precise formulation is this. Free will is to enable the animal to pursue its enlightened self-interest, to make its way and pursue its goals in a social environment that is characterized by culture with its constraints and rules as well as its opportunities. And so, to return to this, freedom in that sense, an important sense of freedom is being free from these instinctual animal learning processes of the essentially stimulus-bound behavior that rule pretty much all the other species. Again, we are animals, we have all these processes inside us, so freedom is going to be partial at best, but partial is plenty good enough. And again, the gist of my approach here is I'm looking for the ultimate explanations in things that happen between people rather than just inside them. Inner processes are important, but inner processes are there because they serve interpersonal functions, including enabling culture to work. And what does this mean for the brain? It means, I'm not going to talk about the brain, sorry, no disrespect. That's partly, I went to school back in the 1970s. Back then, when we had some new phenomena, nobody said what part of the brain lights up then. Back in the 70s, we didn't even know that the brain could light up. So, the bottom line, ultimate functional causes, brain or no brain, are to be found outside in the social environment. That's why the brain is the way it is. Now, I sense some people are comfortable with the term free will. Can you be a scientist while believing in free will? I know some people were told in graduate school that you're not allowed to believe in free will. If you're a scientist, you have to be a determinist. Well, that's just silly at multiple levels, especially in psychology, where there's no determinism. You open any journal article, all our causes are probabilistic, not deterministic. Our causes change the odds of some response by a few percentage points. They do not make an outcome inevitable. So in that sense, it seems particularly absurd to insist on determinism there. But even so, if you want to believe in determinism, you can still believe in free will. Compatibilism, the view that free will and determinism are both true. Philosophers who are the expert thinkers, lots of them subscribe to that view. Also laypersons very cheerfully both believe in determinism and free will. So you can believe in both if you want to. The main drawback of compatibilism is it's dreadfully namby-pamby. You have to water down the definitions of both to make them fit together. But even if you cannot tolerate that amount of nambiness-pambiness, you can still believe in free will. Let me just say to that, determinism does not bear scrutiny as a scientific hypothesis. Phil Hoffman and Fritz Strack, commenting on my paper, said, well, you shouldn't talk about free will because you cannot prove that the person could have acted differently. So believing in free will is like believing in God. Well, I agree with that. First of all, that the essence of the free will idea is that the person could behave differently. The idea that more than one thing is possible. The person, in other words, really makes a choice. So the determinist, one outcome is inevitable. All choice is really an illusion. So I agree with them that that is the essence of the idea of free will. And I also agree, yes, it's true that after the fact you cannot prove that someone could have acted differently. But the argument is charmingly one-sided. Neither can you prove that the person couldn't have acted differently. It's a leap of faith either way. And you can say, all right, well, which leap of faith is the one we should take to believe them that they couldn't or could have acted differently? I'm not sure that's really a useful or inspiring argument, but someone wants to be a total hard-nose and say, I believe the evidence of my senses or scientific proof. Well, that hard-nose would not believe in God, since it's neither proven nor in direct experience, but would believe in free will, since the choice is experienced on a daily basis, and there's no proof that it's not true. So it's really believing in determinism that's like believing in God. Let me just say also that I find it ironic that in a field like social psychology, where choice has played such an important role through dissonance and stress research and everything else, that many people would feel you still have to believe, join this cult and say that all choice is effectively an illusion, that only one outcome is ever possible. And tonight, when you look at your menu, make up your mind, is it really 100% impossible that I could have ordered the onion soup? You can convince yourself of that, perhaps intellectually, again, I think the belief that there are really more than one possibility and people really make choices among these possibilities, that's probably a more useful foundation for our science the way we do it than this belief that no, everything that happened was inevitable. All right, enough of that. The rest of my talk, I want to say you can be a determinist, you can believe in free will, you can be a namby-pamby compatibilist, whatever you want. I would say studying free will is important to do regardless of whether it exists. And let me turn to facts here, because I think science loves facts. First of all, most people believe in free will to some degree, and that belief has behavioral consequences. Starting line of this work, important paper by Kathleen Voss and Jonathan Schooler came out last year, showed you could manipulate participants' belief or disbelief in free will. And if you make people manipulate them to become little determinists, reduce their belief in free will, they become more likely to lie, cheat, and steal. Now, we've adopted these procedures, as John mentioned, and I don't think anyone is saying that research should not be done. In fact, I think all these people are doing research. I think there's a very positive sense that we should study and work on these things. So have no fear, there's no effort to shut down lines of work or inquiry. But anyway, we've adopted their procedures in our laboratory and found a variety of interesting things. For one thing, if you manipulate people to become more deterministic in their thoughts, they're less helpful towards someone in need. Likewise, they're more aggressive, measured in terms of how much hot sauce they will dole out to someone who said, I don't like hot sauce. Determinists tend to be mindless conformists, that when they're rating paintings and they can see supposedly what previous participants have rated, determinists more likely to just copy the other ratings rather than think for themselves. Trait belief measures life is less meaningful determinists than for others. And then getting at some of the processes, Tyler Stillman's done this line of work. If you make people manipulate belief in free will, then think about something bad that they did before. Determinists don't feel as guilty about it. If you make them feel guilty first, then they don't want to believe in free will because they'd rather think I couldn't help it, there was nothing else that was possible. And in this study, we had people reflect on something that they did or did not feel guilty about and write the lesson that they supposedly learned from it, and then we took those lessons and showed them to other coders blind and conditioned to rate the quality of the lesson that they learned. And as you see, the best lesson in terms of is by people who felt guilty and believe in free will. Put another way, guilt does not make determinists want to learn how to be a better person. Last on this study that's still in progress, we had people think about something where they hurt someone else, an experience in the past where they actually hurt someone else, and then list up to 10 counterfactuals of things that they might have done differently to produce a different outcome, and determinists produce significantly fewer. Again, that's consistent with the idea of determinism. Remember, for determinists, there are no counterfactuals. What happened was the only thing that could possibly have happened. Saying that other things could have happened is fundamentally wrong. So there's a consistency there. But the point is, reflecting on what you did wrong, counterfactual analysis of experiences that did not turn out the way you did, that's a useful tool by which people learn and become better and are able to function more effectively in culture. So, return to these first couple facts. People generally believe in free will and belief has behavioral consequences. In terms of belief in it, the belief generally significantly above the midpoint. People report believing in free will. Also in these studies where you manipulate it, the neutral control usually gives the same results as the pro-free will condition, suggesting that that's the baseline. It's the determinism that's a departure from the basic belief. And in terms of behavioral consequences, here's the summary of the stuff I put up. I point this out not to say that determinists are bad people, although I confess it doesn't sound like someone would want for a roommate. But rather my point is that belief in free will contributes to socially desirable, pro-social, effective behavior. And that's consistent with the view that whatever evolved that is called free will, whether it deserves to be free will or not, but the evolved mechanism that is there, that the purpose of that is to enable people to function better in this kind of system, produce the pro-social behavior, enables culture to be successful and work its magic for us so it makes our lives better and improves survival and reproduction. Okay, third fact, people can reliably distinguish between free and unfree actions. And we've been doing these scenario studies. I'm just going to skip the conclusion. I'm going to describe these. But we have people rate different things and to what extent was this or that action free. And in general, actions are rated higher if there's a lack of external demand, if the person's going against external constraints. Second, more thoughtful, conscious reflection leads to higher marks for free will. And also going against short-term self-interest, resisting temptation is seen as higher in free will. So, put in other terms, internal agency, intelligent, rational choice, self-control, these are important things that people reliably associate with free will. I should say also, if you present the action as done randomly, that the person just did it for no reason, people also give that high marks for freedom, and I'm coming back to that in a moment. But yes, random action is seen as relatively free. But fourth fact I want to get to here is that, okay, we have people can reliably distinguish free from non-free actions. And then let's say different inner processes contribute the one to the other. So if you've got a different inner process and a different outcome, well, that sounds like something that psychologists should study. And so we should study free will, and we can make a contribution there, whether or not we think it fits this or that definition of free will, which often boils down to a semantic idea, a semantic argument. So we don't really need to decide whether we believe in it or not, and that's really our job. There is a phenomenon worth studying here. So, in terms of the question for our session here, what can social psychology contribute? I don't think we're going to do an experiment to prove that free will does or does not exist, but we can say if there is such a thing as free will, this is how it works. If there's not, well, this is the real phenomenon that's often mistaken for it. And we can also say, either way, this is why people believe in free will. And by doing these things, we can make a contribution to, as John said, this centuries-long interdisciplinary debate on one of the great questions of human life. So, what kind of inner process produces the free as opposed to the unfree action? There is this random action that people sometimes say, well, to be free will, it has to show that there's no causality that's completely independent of anything else that ever happened or could happen or any external constraint. People do, as I say, associate that with freedom, but it's highly unlikely that that exists. Random action, it would be of dubious value. I think of it this way: suppose a baby were born today with some genetic mutation that enabled it to behave in this completely random fashion. Would this baby survive and reproduce better than other babies? It's hard to see how. Certainly not effective in culture. Culture doesn't place much value on random behavior. It's much more favors orderly, rule-following behavior and so on. And also, empirically, we know people are not very good at random action. When you make them try to generate random sequences, they actually come up with sequences that have patterns. So this idea of free will as the random action generator, I think, is not a useful form. In contrast, what would be useful for a cultural being who's trying to, an animal that's trying to make its way and survive and reproduce effectively in an environment marked by culture with rules and sharing information and specific rules and things like that. Well, if you look at these things, these have all been talked about in the literature on free will, and I think these would be a highly useful and adaptive form of free will that we should perhaps understand. Self-control, rational choice, ad hoc plans, as in making up a specific plan for what you're going to do on a particular date, and active instead of passive responding initiative. All of these highly useful and adaptive, particularly for cultural animals. So the question, is there some kind of common process for these four that would suggest that there is a single psychological reality underlying what's popularly understood as free will, and something that might be understood as the will, whether it's like the term free or not. Let me go through these in order. Self-control, I have spoken of this organization before and covered my research on self-control. I'm not going to repeat it today. I need to do that. So let me just say by way of summary, we found that yes, self-control seems to depend on a limited internal kind of energy process, so that after acts of self-control, some of that is depleted. Subsequent acts of self-control don't do as well. Also seems to be tied in physiologically to some of the glucose levels in the bloodstream. Rational intelligent choice, another hallmark of human behavior, another potential valuable and adaptive form of free will. We find that that's tied to the same thing. A paper we published last year showed that people who had made a lot of choices, in one case they made a lot of choices among products, in the other condition they rated the same products, thought about it and so on, but did not make choices. And then we put them for one of the standard tests of self-control, which is how long they can hold their hand in ice water. And sure enough, making choices seems to have depleted that same resource. So self-control is worse after making a lot of decisions. And I said the adaptive thing is not just choice, but rational intelligent choice. Well, intelligence also seems to be tied into this resource. A paper by Brandon Schmeichel a few years ago showed that when after people have exerted self-control and depleted their willpower, then on logical reasoning problems from the Jerry analytical test, they do significantly worse. So this kind of intelligent thought is substantially impaired when this willpower resource is down. So far we have making choices, depleting the same resource, using self-control, ditto for intelligent thought, so common energy resource for these three things. Let me turn now to planning. Planning is an important form of behavior, especially in culture. Study of planning has lagged for a while, but moved forward in recent decades very much by Peter Goldwasser's work, showing that people make plans in the form of if-then structures. He calls them implementation intentions. So if this happens, I will do this, or when this happens, I will do this. And shows people much more likely, if they do this, to succeed in carrying out the behavior. There's two tied in the same energy research as a paper by Webb and Sheeran showed a couple years ago, that if they made this sort of plan, then they're more effective in subsequent behavior despite ego depletion from higher self-control. Our own work has picked up this importance of plans as well. Looking at the issue, John raised the issue, we have many goals, and indeed Brian Little found the average college student has 15 different personal projects. So we can't fulfill all our goals all the time, we can't pursue everything through to fruition. How does the mind cope with this? The unconscious keeps working on things, especially if they're unfulfilled. We have replicated a number of these effects ourselves, the zygarnik. So the unconscious is not trying to actually fulfill the goal itself, it's trying to tug at the sleeve of the conscious executive to say, get consciousness back working on it again. So it intrudes reminders of the unfulfilled goal into consciousness. Likewise, the unfulfilled goal will bias attitudes toward relevant stimuli. Well, that might be useful, or that might prevent me from reaching the goal. So attitudes toward these new things are biased by the unfulfilled goals, and can even impair performance. If you haven't fulfilled one goal, and you go to perform something else, especially if that needs executive function, then the unfulfilled goal will interfere and intrude and lower performance. The important thing, though, is all these effects are eliminated just by making plans. It looks like what the unconscious wants the consciousness to do is not necessarily to fulfill the goal, but rather just to make a plan for doing it, and so that the unconscious knows how to carry that out. I'll describe one of these studies. We had students in one condition write about the most important final exam that was upcoming in a couple weeks. That was one condition. Another, write about the exam and make a detailed plan for where and when they're going to study. And the third condition, they write about the most important upcoming social event. And this is Florida State, very serious party school, so there's a lot to do in this condition as well. And then we measured, for this study, we measured the zygarnik intrusions. They had complete word fragments, which are ambiguous. Do they have something to do with studying or not? So what did we find? In the social control condition, where they're thinking about parties, our students are not really thinking about studying all that much when parties are on their mind. But you remind them of an upcoming exam, bingo, suddenly there are a lot of thoughts about studying that intrude into consciousness. But if they make a plan, notice they haven't done any of that studying, but just having made a plan for study, we're back to party time. And the unconscious considers it done and checked off. So making a plan eliminates the zygarnik unfulfilled goal. This is consistent with what John said, is we need consciousness to help give the blueprint for action, so the automatic and unconscious knows what to do. Okay, last of these, initiative, instead of passive responding, active initiative, that too, on the same kind of energy resource. This is a study last night did not published yet. We had subjects first depleted by a self-control task of controlling their attention. And then the experimenter took them into a room, sat them at a computer, and said, just follow the prompts, the computer will tell you what to do. The experimenter hit start and left the room. The computer went to blue screen and just stayed there. And so the measure was how long does the subject just sit there like a lump staring at this blue screen. And sure enough, having depleted their willpower by prior act of self-control, sat there much longer waiting for the environment to tell them what to do, as opposed to taking the initiative themselves to go in and say this isn't working. So self-control and initiative, again, seeming to use the same resource. So what we have here, these 4 highly adaptive forms of behavior useful for cultural animals. These all use the same energy resource. I say that's the psychological reality between popular belief and free will. There's a real phenomenon there. Whether you believe it deserves to be called free will or not is up to you. But this is something that corresponds to what people understand in that way and is an important factor in guiding behavior. Now, Constantine said we're supposed to do 5 minutes on consciousness, so let me quickly turn to that. I agree with what John said here, that free will and consciousness are not the same problem. Many people associate them and think they're the same thing. But they do overlap. In particular, we can't find any theories of unconscious free will. So to the extent people believe in free action, it depends to some degree on conscious choice. Now, consciousness in our field has taken a beating lately. People suggesting it's not so good for this or that, make mistakes, and so on. Showing that perception of the world, it can be fooled in terms of direct control of behavior. It seems dispensable, and sometimes it doesn't know what's going on. So, some people suggest it's not doing much at all. I would suggest that maybe that means we've been looking in the wrong place for its proper function. It's not primarily for sensory input or behavioral output, but rather it's a kind of internal processing. Essentially, consciousness is the brain making input to itself, using information it already has to make a little internal film for itself, for processing things, communicating, organizing information from different parts of the mind and brain. And again, not so much for the physical environment, specifically much more for dealing with the social and cultural environment. In terms of the cognitive structure, and this will be a full talk itself, so I'm just going to quick overview. What consciousness essentially is, seems to be the place where the automatic mind constructs sequences, meaningful sequences of thought. So things like multi-word speech, the unconscious has language, but it tends to work one word at a time. It attempts to prime multiple words or sentences and so on. Generally not been successful. To make sentences, you need to do that in consciousness, but that's highly adaptive because you can represent much more, in fact, infinitely more information in sentences than you can in single words. Logical reasoning, nice studies by Nathan Dewall, showed reasoning where you move from one idea, logically derive other ideas, that depends on consciousness. Counting and quantification, likewise consciously, we may not see that as obviously as a social thing, but remember, economic trade is an important determinant of the success or failure of culture, the economic marketplace, and economic trade depends on quantification, how much corn for a heap of fish, things like that. So it's essential there. And lastly, causal inference, the effects are a little more complicated, but some kinds of causal understanding, again, seem to depend on consciousness. Putting these together, what they enable consciousness to do is narratives, construct narratives or stories. You can understand your behavior and experiences in story form. You can tell stories about what other things happen. A lot of information is transmitted by stories. And then, even more crucially, to simulate sequences of thought away from the here and now. We keep mistaking, say it's not for direct sensory input or behavioral output, but consciousness frees us from the immediate stimulant environment so we can think about past events, future events, possible events, events going on elsewhere, and so on. And this is tremendously useful for a social creature. And just to describe some of the uses of this ability, this essential ability of consciousness to meaningfully simulate things away from the here and now in decision making. Well, remember the rat in the Skinner box, when it decides to press the bar, it just kind of has a good feeling about pressing the bar because it's been reinforced for that. But humans facing decisions, we can simulate, if I do this, then she will say this, and then I will say that back, and then we'll do this. But if I start off this way, then this will happen. You can go through all the different options and pick the one that will likely produce the best downstream effects. Likewise, in learning, the Skinnerian animal learns when the event happens and the reinforcer is provided. It learns then or never. Of course, humans can replay events over and over from the past, and not just replay them, we can replay them counterfactually. If I had done this differently, then something else might have happened and it could have gone as well. And so greatly increases the power of learning, highly useful for the complicated environment of culture with its many rules and opportunities and constraints and norms and things like that. And the third, understanding others, being able to simulate other people's point of view, other people's perspectives, what they might be thinking or intending or wanting, what they're likely to do in response. That, again, very useful for a cultural being, which depends on shared understanding for negotiations, for group tests, as well. And we're not going to go through the rest, but you get the idea of crucial functions of consciousness, not for direct sensory input or behavioral output, but for simulating things often away from the here and now to facilitate adaptation to the social and cultural environment. So to conclude, I want to think both consciousness and free will, in the sense that they are really important factors in human life. They're there for adapting to the new kinds of social life that human beings have created, i.e. culture. Consciousness simulates possible and recent events. Free will adapts and changes behavior to culture's rules and opportunities. Together, consciousness and free will make culture possible, which is our species' solution to the problems of survival and reproduction. These things then are the essence of what makes us human. Thank you.